All right, previously I have given a lot of information about what kinds of concentrations we're seeing in the drinking water wells samples, and that was a lot of color, a lot of information that may not have been so useful to your individual situation. So I'm leaving that out, but I want to touch on some key areas. I'm going to review the timeline that I've shown before and the key points that we're getting across, and also review the decision tree that we at the State Health Department are using when we're evaluating the drinking water data. And that helps us to determine what kind of recommendations we're going to be making based on your own results. I want to talk to you a little bit about the reverse osmosis filters, because we have been testing them, and I've been getting in touch with Culligan to see where they are at with some things that I have questions on. I'll talk a little bit more about the sampling request process that I hope will help streamline it for you. And we actually, I'll say it right now, so I got your, while I have your attention, is we actually would prefer that if you have a request to have your well sample, whether it's an irrigation well or it's your drinking water well, please, the best first stop is the local health department, district health department too. So when Janice was up here speaking at the beginning of the meeting, that's who I'm talking about. And I'll point that out again in the slides when we get to them. One thing I want to get across, not only to the community, but to your visitors, is touching the water is fine. This is anything that goes down the hatch. That is what I've been talking to people about on the phone. Goes down the hatch, we've got a concern with it. I've received questions about vegetable gardens. I'm seeing that as being fine, and I'll go through a slide on that too. And then finally, discussions that we have been having with the CDC, specifically the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, who is typically involved at federal sites, at Department of Defense sites, but we do their work for them in the state of Michigan in this case. So, reviewing the timeline as far as where drinking water has come into the picture here at Wurtsmith in regard to PFAS, and I will probably slip and say PFCs at times. In September 2015, we identified, and when I say we, I mean the state identified a water supply well at the mobile home park that is near Wurtsmith. So they immediately got out there and did side-by-side sampling with the Air Force, and both the DEQ samples and the Air Force's samples showed that there were PFASs present in that well. So they saw those results in October, and immediately plans began to get the samples for other residential drinking water wells. December 2015, that sampling effort began. And those were those residences across F-41 from the Air Force Base, so right on the west shore of Van Etten Lake there. 2016, we get the results. We want to have a fact sheet so that people could understand their results. We have updated that fact sheet because if you have gotten your well tested since that initial effort, since we started meeting in March of last year, you're going to be getting your results from, well, directly from me, but it's a different lab, and different labs do different things. I'll just explain that more when we get to that slide, as far as how they report their information from the testing results. In February, the letters started going out to people with their results and the fact sheet that was developed back then. And we sent up a follow-up recommendation letter as far as, we don't think that you should be using your well because it's been impacted. And we went through the rationale of why. I'll cover that again. And the local health department was doing some door-to-door to make sure that people had that information. March, I completed the report that was a more formal evaluation of that drinking water well data, and that was when we had the first meeting in regard to the drinking water and the PFAS is here. So the key points is that we're taking a conservative stance. There is no federal regulatory number for this. The lifetime health advisory number that EPA came up with it's an advisory number. It is not the law. And we are using that as our basis, as a number for comparing when we need to compare to a number. But in some cases, in a lot of the first round of sampling, we have people who are directly across from the base, and the base has this very massive amount of contamination on it. And so we were concerned about this uncontrolled contamination. What would it mean as it's moving along? Are we going to get higher concentrations in the future? Have we had higher concentrations before? We didn't know how long it had been in wells. Those were things that we didn't know. So we felt that the appropriate stance to take was to be more protective. So we are using the best available science, but these are what the regulatory and the regulated community call emerging contaminants of concern. We think that there could be an issue with them, but we don't have the end-all be-all of information about these contaminants, about these chemicals. As I mentioned, we have a decision tree that we use when we evaluate the data, and then as needed, we request more data to verify these results and strengthen our conclusions. So the data evaluation, this is kind of falling under the what we know, what we don't know rubric there. There's a lot of animal and even human studies, and it's showing that these chemicals, this chemical class, has the potential to harm human health. We do know that PFAS are persistent and that they bioaccumulate. Persistent, Bob talked about it, that they don't break down in the environment, and bioaccumulate means that they build up in the body. That's why at Clark's Marsh we have the do not eat fish from those marsh ponds notification out there. Now, some of these chemicals have long half-lives in humans. That means they stay in our bodies quite a while, and in this case it's years. Usually chemicals just flush through our bodies and we either pee them out or poop them out, and that's it. Well, it doesn't happen that easily with PFAS, with some of them. Just the way that they're built and their chemical nature, they stick around a little longer. At the time that we started, the contamination was not fully understood or controlled. The contamination is still not fully understood or controlled. We're getting there, but it does take time. It does take a lot of sampling efforts, readjusting where we need to focus on areas. One sample cannot determine what the past exposure amount was or its duration, and it's not predictive of the future. When we talk about these samples, whether it's a drinking water sample or a sample, say that's in the soil or in the air out in the environment, that is what was occurring in that specific location or environmental medium at that time that the sample was taken. So that's another, as far as an unknown. We do know that the contamination at the Air Force Base was moving towards drinking water wells. We felt quite certain about that, not only moving towards them, but entering them. And that the PFAS in most of the water samples are higher than what's in the Hushra or the city water. So that tells us that it's more than what we would expect out there. I want to talk a little bit about EPA's health advisory numbers and also about the units that are used to report your drinking water well results. First off, the EPA's health advisory level is called a lifetime health advisory, but I put quotes about that because in this case, for this type of chemical, the concern is not only for exposure to it for a lifetime, but short-time exposure too. There are concerns that it could affect a fetus or a newborn as far as results that they have seen in animal studies, that it could have problems with the bones ossifying or laying down calcium and becoming hard. It could delay that a little bit. And so we want to watch out for that. And we also want to protect against, some PFAS are linked to cancers. There are also concerns that we have about non-cancer effects, as far as whether it's affecting the liver or cholesterol, the thyroid, whether it's affecting the immune system. Still, a lot of science out there that has yet to happen, but right now we have enough science to realize this is something to pay attention to. So the number, right here in the middle of the slide, the number considers these two specific PFAS, so we call them PFOA and PFOS. In combination, the advisory is not to exceed 70 parts per trillion. That's what the PPT is. That's not percent, that's parts per trillion. And if you translate parts per trillion, if you have received the well result notification from us, it would have reported it in nanograms per liter. That's a 1-for-1 translation there. If you were in the early bunch that was sampled by the Air Force back in December of 2015, that particular lab that they used reported it back in micrograms per liter, which is parts per billion. So if you're going to convert this, for instance, I do know, and Paul Carroll's going to speak to it, that the Air Force plans to go back to that initial bunch of houses to see what kind of changes there may have been. Their lab may be reporting it in this lower number, or I shouldn't say lower number, I'll say different units. So what you want to do when you're seeing that is you look at first what units the lab report is showing to you, and then if it's nanograms per liter, that's part per trillion, so you compare it to 70. If it's micrograms per liter, that's part per billion, so you're going to actually compare it to this number. Now these slides are, well, first off, we're getting videotaped tonight, so this presentation is going to be up on the township's website, the YouTube channel, but also these slides will be available on our web page. More information on that at the end of the presentation, so that you can come back to this and look at it. But we will try to make as much information available to you as possible so that you are essentially comparing apples to apples during this, not apples to crab apples. So this is our decision tree. So super easy to read, right? Well, basically, we're starting at the top here. And the first question we ask ourselves, and when I say we, I mean State Health Department when I'm doing the evaluation of what your results are, is the well down gradient or sort of like downstream from a Wurtsmith Air Force Base originating groundwater plume? In other words, is the plume from the Air Force Base moving in the direction of this well, the way that we understand where the plumes are right now? And if so, is it within that area that we figured is impacted? Is it moving in that area, or do we know that that area is impacted? If it is impacted, we recommend seeking alternate water and offer a reverse osmosis system. Data will not be necessary. You'll see in the next slide where the area is where we are making this recommendation, even if you have not been sampled yet, or if you were sampled and it showed nothing. I would still recommend that people contact the district health department to make sure they can get set up, and these are people with wells, drinking water wells, to get set up with alternate water, either the reverse osmosis system or the bottled water, while we figure out how the permanent fix is going to be completed. If it is not within the impacted area that the current knowledge of the plume is telling us. Then we say, are there data available? Previously, I said on this side, doesn't matter if there's data available. Here, we want to know if data are available. If yes, if data are available and it says, yes, PFAS from Wurtsmith Air Force Base are present, and I don't even worry about a number there, just that they are there, please seek an alternate water system with the local health department. If data are not available for the well, we need that data to make the decision for this particular situation. So on this map, and it got cut off just a smidge, and I apologize for that, but this shows the extent of where we are recommending alternate water. So yes, it got cut off at the top, but where that is cut off is just shy of the Boy Scout camp, because the Boy Scout camp is on city water, and I believe that this is the state park that's just south of the Boy Scout camp. So it does not extend up to the Colbath area, it cuts off before then. It comes down to here, and it's all on the west side of Vanetton Creek and down to the river. It does not go on base because the base has got city water. It has gone over to the other side of this, and the reason these are just straight lines across, and it's a straight line across at the bottom where F41 and US 23 come together, is that it was just easy to give a visual. If we were saying it's within this area, we can tell people, we feel that this area in the blue is impacted by PFAS coming from Wurtsmith, and we recommend that if you have a drinking water well, you talk with the local health department about what your options are. The other side of the decision tree is for those areas that are not down gradient, not downstream from the base. So this is the Colbath neighborhood. This is the neighborhood that is between the high school and the river, and then up at where the McDonald's fire was by F41 and Kings Corner Road. So we are looking for our data available for the well. If yes, and if it's greater than 70, then we recommend seeking an alternate water system. If we don't have data, we need that data for decision making. So with this, Bob did point out that there was one home across from the high school that did exceed the 70, not by much, but it was over 70. So we've got that checked out. A lot of those homes in that neighborhood have been checked and are below 70. And we do have a few more to sample, so if you live in that area and you have not been sampled yet, please make sure to touch base with local health department on that. All right, let's talk about that RO system. Does it work? You bet it works. Okay, the RO system that's being installed by the Culligan through the contract with local health department is a filter that was tested by the Minnesota Department of Health. And so they had good data on that. Now we have pretty good data on it. Only 5 points. I'm going to come to this last one because you can see the bars much more clearly. These 5 different colors are 5 different properties where reverse osmosis systems had been installed and had been there about 6 months. So they're not brand new, they've been at work. And so this was the pre-test of each of those wells before the filter, so on the upstream side of the filter. After the filter, nearly everything's wiped out. If you want to look at the individual PFAS, the PFOA, the PFOS, the perfluorohexane sulfonate, those are really being smacked down too by that filter. So the filter works. One thing I will say is this filter has not been certified by the National Sanitation Foundation. I've gotten in touch with Culligan saying, don't you think that would be a good idea? We're using your product. Sure, Minnesota found out that it worked fine, but don't you think it'd be a good idea? And they said, yeah, we're going to get that tested as soon as possible. Now, as soon as possible for a corporation, let's see how that goes. But National Sanitation Foundation has just recently put together a standard that allows for certification of these filters. So it's almost like the Good Housekeeping seal of approval. You got the NSF seal of approval. That means that that filter has met the standard for reducing PFOA and PFOS, PFOA and PFOS, because those are the two that EPA has the lifetime health advisory number for. So let's talk a little bit about the sampling requests. I've been hearing about requests when we get through with these meetings, people talk with whichever agency personnel are here and they pass that information along to me. Really the best thing to do is to make that request to District Health Department 2. And I put this bullet point up top here, because I want to get across that just because you want it done, we may not find it necessary to sample that. You may find it necessary, but for purposes of the investigation or for any public health purposes, we may not. Because if you are already in the alternate water zone, please go get that alternate water, that blue hash zone. If you are, further west than Foote Dam, not expecting that there. So that's why there's no guarantee that sampling will occur. I will take your request, and I will get in touch with you if we think at this time it's not necessary. But if we do think it's necessary, you will be sampled. Oops, I'm sorry. So coming back to that, so if you make that request to District Health Department 2, or whoever you make it to, they're going to get that to me, because I'm keeping a database on these sample requests that come in. That's so that I can keep a database that lets me know, yes, I have been in contact with that person after their results came in, to let them know what the results are and what my recommendation was. So once we get a bunch of requests in, I will team up with the MDEQ team, with Bob and his consultants, and discuss these requests and strategize which ones are most appropriate for sampling. Maybe it's all of them. Maybe it's just a few of them. We'll get a list together, and boy, there's too many buttons to push here. The MDEQ team will contact those that are going to be sampled, because they need to set up that good time when you're going to be home and they're up there to get the sample from you. And then I will contact the homes that are not yet. Not yet means you go into waiting mode. It's possible it might be a not at all that we come up with, or it might be something that, let's see, you're a little too far out that the data don't suggest you're getting out that way, but if we get something between you and where we know the plume is now, we may want to touch base with you again. When those results come in, I get a hold of you. Right now, it's been just a letter, unless I think that it needs to be moved along more quickly, and then I'll give you a call. Sometimes I call you regardless, because I've been talking with quite a few of you even before the results come in. But I will let you know what your results are, and I will also let District Health Department know which ones are getting recommended for alternate water and which ones are not. For some people, I have gotten returned mail. That is because at the beginning of this, when we were kind of scrambling and getting all our ducks lined up, is that we got the address for your well, but maybe you are a snowbird and you change your address for the winter, or maybe you have a different mailing address rather than for your well. So if you have not received your results, even if they were all the way back in December of 2015, please contact me, because I want you to have your results and to know what they are. So my contact is here. I've got cards on the table, have contact listed at the end too. Some people have asked about, well, can I just take a sample and send it into a lab? Well, you probably could. And because we've had enough of these questions, what we want to do, what we've been doing, is we've been checking with labs, getting information on the cost, the list of the chemicals they have, because sometimes it might be what we call an abbreviated list, which is only 6. We'd really like to know the full list that can be analyzed for by most labs. It gives a little more information, at least to us as the investigators. Also, do they provide information on how to take the sample? As Bob talked about, it's very easy to, because of the clothing that we wear and the materials in our home, to get some contamination into a sample. So what we want to make sure of, and that's why the DEQ team is pretty much the same team time after time. They do this a very specific way, a very strict protocol, having to follow those steps. So any chemical that is detected in the sample is because that chemical was in that sample from the tap, not introduced by maybe handling something that had these chemicals in it, like clothing or grease-proof paper, things like that. So we are working on a fact sheet. I will tell you this, the New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services, I believe that's the name of their state health department, they have a fact sheet. And I've seen that, and I kind of like the way that they have it, but I want to make one that's more specific for us, because New Hampshire is dealing with a former Air Force Base site too. Touching the water is fine. Fine, fine, fine. Cannonball into Van Etten Lake. Go fishing, handle the fish, throw it back in, get the slime off your fingers. Bathing is fine, washing dishes and clothes is fine, wading in the water. If kids are sitting on the beach and building the sand castles and using the water to do the little dribblies on the sand castles, everything skin-related, fine. It's anything that goes down the hatch. So I'm talking drinking, I'm talking cooking. People have asked about using it on their vegetable gardens. And Minnesota has done a study, other states are beginning to do studies or conduct research, and I looked at some papers on this and what other states were saying. And it looks like a lot of the research papers are using biosolids, which is the sludge from a wastewater treatment plant. Sometimes that's used as a soil enrichment, or there's also research for using water that has PFAS in it. The plants will probably take up a little bit of the smaller sized PFAS because those are going to travel more easily up into the plant tissue. And these are not expected to build up in the body. Also, they do not appear to accumulate to any great extent in the plant tissue. Therefore, they are not expected to be a health concern for homegrown produce. But people have also asked me about canning this produce. Well, what I would suggest is if you're making a lighter heavy syrup, or if you have to add water like when you can tomatoes, I would suggest using the PFAS-free water. So if you've had to give up using your well, then use the water that you are using in place of the water, whether it's the bottled water or the stuff that's gone through the RO. Okay. Discussions with the CDC. I'm going to have a quick drink of water here. Okay. The CDC, this specific office within the CDC is the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, ATSDR. They are the people who fund the work that my office does. And it's basically working at Superfund sites and figuring out the public health implications at these contaminated sites. So we do a lot of partnering with them. They pretty much let us do the work that they need to get done. We are their Michigan arm. We've been keeping them informed about sites in Michigan that have PFAS concerns, and certainly this site, because ATSDR was the author of the 2001 public health assessment when the initial contamination was found at Wordsmith Air Force Base, the solvents in the groundwater, the TCE and the petroleum that was there, petroleum products. So we've been discussing not only the community's concerns, and not just health concerns, your concerns about property values, your concerns about what this is doing to the local economy, but we've also been talking with them about veterans' concerns. And I know that there's a few veterans in the group tonight who have been at Wordsmith and maybe have been stationed at other bases elsewhere. Okay, well, PFAS is a national and it's really a global issue. You probably are going to be reading more and more about it, and so there has not been a final response developed by ATSDR yet. We've asked them as far as what would be necessary to start talking with the community or with the veterans group about these questions that they have. They're talking about getting blood sampled. They're talking about having a health study. They're asking questions about what does this mean to them? The veterans want to know, can they get VA benefits? Well, some of these decisions are beyond State Health Department, they're beyond ATSDR. There is some work that potentially could be done by the CDC, but ATSDR needs to have more of that determination by their upper management, and I know that has not been signed off yet. But I do know, I've been nagging them almost on a weekly basis so that they do know this site exists. So a couple of resources for you to turn to. We've got our webpage. We've made it a much easier web address, just michigan.gov/Wordsmith. The newer information is going to be towards the top of each section. And we already have links to the EPA, ATSDR, and the Air Force web pages. I'd like to add links to the township page where people can see the videos from the meetings, and also to the district health department page, so that you can just easily get from one place to another. Then also for the contacts, what we think is the best thing is to start local. So please start with the local health department, and they will figure out who needs to be aware of your concern, whether it's getting your well tested, whether it's finding out what's in the catch basin behind the Kmart there, or the Admiral gas station. What about that leak there, or the Headlam dry cleaners, what's going on with that site? So that might be a DEQ thing. They might have to point you to Air Force about that. So, and then for me, you've got my contact information, you've got business cards over there, and if you can't find me, find local health, they know how to find me. Sue?
I have a question.
Oh, just 1 second, we'll get to your question. I want to mention that District Health Department number 2 is here tonight. If you're interested in having your water sampled, I know a few of you mentioned that, they have a table out in the little lobby back here, so stop by and talk to them about getting your water sampled. You can do that tonight. Again, if you have any questions related to Chris's presentation, we'll take a couple of questions now, and we will answer all of your questions during the question and answer session. So
You sir by the window?
I'm not sure when the school switched over, or if they ever did, from well water to city water. And there might have been a lot of kids that might have been drinking that water. Has that been checked into?
I am not sure. Okay, the question is, when did the school switch from well water to city water? The school is on a well. And that well was sampled in March of last year and then April of this year. When earlier this year, when the test well, the monitoring well, was put in by the bus garage, and they noticed the high concentrations of PFAS in that well, I asked the the DEQ team to go back out and sample at the school. And the school is in pretty good shape. It's very similar to what the HUSHRA or the city water levels are. Okay, you sir in the back. I'm going to kind of work around this way a little bit.
I want to ask you about humidifiers. That hasn't been brought up. Using that water in our humidifiers, you're ingesting those PFCs by breathing it in, correct?
That's a good question. As far as using humidifiers, putting water into humidifiers, and then the concern about inhaling them or ingesting them.
Yeah,
You know what?
I've been
I don't have an answer for you.
Yeah,
That's
well, I
something I'm
didn't
going to have to
see it
work
there
on.
anywhere, so-
Right, that's a good question. Hang on a second, I'm going to write it down. Thank you. Thank you for my secretaries. Okay, I'm swinging around this way. You, sir, in the back there, right along the aisleway.
You talk about these ROs and that, and you're gonna set us up with the ROs. Now, there's a maintenance on these ROs, because every so many months, those filters have to be changed. Are we gonna get service that way, or are we on our own on that?
The question is for the reverse osmosis filters, as far as the maintenance and when the filters have to be changed out. And I know that the district health department will be addressing that during their talk, but I'll give you a quick sneak peek preview of that, and I believe that there is some state funds that are going to help out with that. Thanks to Senator Stamas. Okay, and you'll hear more about that when District 2 has their presentation. Okay, anybody over on this side? Oh my gosh, oh, I was about to leave you. Yes, ma'am.
Can I understand you say that there currently is not a blood test to detect if you have an accumulation of this stuff?
The question is there a blood test to detect what amount of PFAS may be in your body? There is a blood test. As a matter of fact, there is what is called a national exposure study that's been going on for probably a couple of decades now. Doesn't happen every year, but every few years, this exposure study gets blood samples from a representative percentage of the population to look at what's in their blood, and they have other parameters that they look for in this study. And they have been looking at PFAS in people's blood. And the general population, because of the controls that have been going on in industry to reduce the use of these compounds, that concentration has gone down in the representative population's blood. I will say this too, that in areas of where there are PFAS contaminated sites, where people have started getting their blood tests, some of those sites have shown a higher concentration of these chemicals in people's blood. Now, the thing of it is some people immediately jump to, therefore harm will occur. That is not a solid line. That might not even be a line that exists. We cannot use a blood concentration to predict what would happen in a person. We can't predict on anybody here what is going to happen as a result of potentially having this in your drinking water well. And I know that that is not a satisfactory answer, but that is what the state of the science is. I'm gonna do it. Two more? Okay, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this guy up front and that guy way back there. And then I'll be talking with everybody else at the end of the meeting.
I'm a little concerned, maybe a little confused, but you talked about two sites that had fire, worse than fire departments come in with the chemical. One was the high school, the bus garage, and the other one was off Colback Road. Now, can you tell me how those areas are going to continue to be monitored?
Okay, the question is, the two sites that I talked about, the area by the high school and the area up on Colbath Road, where foam was brought in to extinguish fires, what is the process going forward as continuing monitoring of those sites? That's probably more of a DEQ question, but I believe that with those monitoring wells that have been placed in those areas and any others that they may place out there, those will be checked on a regular basis. Now, regular may mean quarterly, and Bob, where did you run off to? Do you have any indication for frequency of the monitoring of those wells, or would it just be quarterly for now?
We'd have to talk about it, because it's really the, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we'll have to, we're starting to talk about monitoring on a regular basis for a variety of things, surface water and wells. That would normally be part of an official monitoring program put together by the Air Force. But those two areas that you're talking about, three areas, like the McDonald School, are areas that our district staff is looking at. So I'll have to sit down with them and see how often they can do that sampling. And we're still waiting for data to come in to know even which wells to sample.
So that, probably the answer to that is stay tuned, okay?
I mean, it could be in a regular basis.
Okay.
I just don't know.
Well, I was
Okay.
concerned simply because you said we weren't coming from the Washington Airport.
Right. So it's not part of my program, but, right, it's part of the district.
Okay.
You know, my stuff is.
I guess I was concerned, but I just didn't want them to fall off.
Right, the concern is that they not fall off the map, and there will be some kind of plan set forth by the office within DEQ that set those, I'm getting to you, and I know where you are. Okay, as far as that particular office that put those in. So that will be people who are conferring with Bob on this site and making sure that it is watched. Now, I believe that because they are not being, at this point, we understand them not to be impacted by contamination flowing from the base, it doesn't make sense to think that the concentrations would go up any higher. But monitoring them is a good idea. I want to get back to that gentleman in the back, and then I'm really sorry that I'm going to have to wait on the rest of you. Yes, sir. New York Giants.
We were at the first meeting, and I made a suggestion then, which I heard what you guys said that you might take under advisement. Why has no survey been done of the residents around this area as far as health complications that might have already been cropped up? So that you get some kind of indication of whether or not you have, complication spots or hot spots that are cropping up to compare that with the well testing. It just seems to be a natural correlation. If people are cropping up with autoimmune diseases and cancers in heavy concentrations that are above the statistical norms, and you're seeing, higher readings of their PFOSs, then that just seems like it should be a natural thing done. And it's a low cost of, thing that will give you more data. So why isn't that been done yet?
Okay, the question is, and he pointed out that this was brought up, he brought this up at one of the first meetings, was that why has not a health survey of the community been carried out? And you indicated that it would be a low-cost way of checking the temperature of the community. First off, it's not low cost. It needs to be well thought out before we go forward and just say, how are you feeling? What are your health problems? We need to use what's called an epidemiologist, somebody who's used to designing these surveys. It probably would give us some helpful information, but teasing out what information is helpful and what information just kind of clouds up the water a little bit. Well, that was probably a lousy analogy, I'm sorry. Clouds up the air a little bit. We need to approach that carefully. And we need to consider too, a little bit of where all the contamination is, so we know who it is that we want to point out, but we probably would be asking the entire community. So, one of the things that needs to be teased out is, you ask two different people, what are your health concerns? They say they have the same concerns. One's been drinking the water, one's been having clean water. How do you tell the difference? That's where we need an epidemiologist, and we have epidemiologists, and ATSDR does. So it's possible we could work that way towards that, some kind of survey like what you're saying. But that is not something that's happening right now, and I'm
Well,
sorry.
My point is simply that when I say low cost, I mean, in comparison, all the well testing that you're doing, doing a simple questionnaire, even though it's gonna take a lot of pre-work, as you say, it's not going to come anywhere close to all this well testing, and when you're well testing, you're just basically finding out what the level of the contaminants are, but not what impact it's having on human lives or animal lives. And so, it seems to me you're doing half the job, and that's the point I raised, and I still raise it. You don't know what the back end of it is. Is there a health issue directly related to this? And that just seems like a natural thing to do at this point. So, I hope it gets done soon. Thank you for your answer.
Well, thank you for bringing it up again, and you can continue to ask that question and keep pushing us on that, because we want to be sure that people are not harmed by this and have an understanding of what potential effects there are. Maybe the information that's out there on these chemicals is sufficient now. Maybe we do need to look more. But there's, as I mentioned, it's a lot more complicated than something I could talk about right now. And when Sue talks a little bit later as far as a different type of community group than what the Air Force is going to talk about, I hope that you will listen up then and consider what she is going to be proposing. Right now I'm going to turn it over to Paul Carroll with U.S. Air Force for their presentation. Thank you.